Okay, so I'm finally making another video, and this one's actually the cool one because this one's going over the wiring that I just did that works, and everything works. So here's the deal. I will do this for people too. If you wanted to send me your wiring and have me merge it for you, then email it back to you. But here's the deal. Yes, I did do it, and it all works, and it did work first try. But that was my first time doing an actual harness merge. I've done a lot of wiring, but not like that. But again, it did work first try. So, But anyways, I'll go over what I did for this wagon and got it running, and then I'll also tell you along the way how if you were to do a standalone ECU with it instead, or if you were to have an automatic trans or a manual trans, how that would change the wiring operation, what to do, So let me take this out and I'll throw it on the bench, and then we'll get a light on here for that, and we will show you that. Alright, now that I got this harness out of my 99 Legacy GT wagon, I'm going to go over it with you guys and kind of just show you what I did first and why I chose to do what I did. And then as I'm talking about that and kind of towards the end, I'll go on to if you wanted to change certain parts of how I did it, what that would entail and how you go about doing that. First, I'm just going to make sure we're all on the same page. I know that I don't know everything, but there's a lot of people that don't know even as much as I do. So just so that we're on the same page about me talking about this, this is your bulkhead harness. This bulkhead harness is the one that sits behind the dash in your car on the firewall. And you can think about your car's wiring system or everything together as like a big puzzle. And each harness, your car is comprised of multiple wiring harnesses, all the way down to even your engine has its own little wiring harness, and they're all little puzzle pieces that will only work and show the big picture when they're all together. And they all have their own very important, crucial ingredient as well to add. So this is the only harness you would have to touch doing it this way though, is the actual bulkhead harness behind the dash. The way I did it on my 05 Impreza RS is I basically, you can think about it, it wasn't just like this, but it was basically like you parked my car, my 05 Impreza, next to an 02 Outback LL Bean with a 6-cylinder in it, and I stripped them both down to nothing, and I just took all the wiring out of my 05 Impreza and put all the wiring from a 6-cylinder Outback into my Impreza. So now everything is basically wiring-wise an 02 Outback LL Bean. I don't recommend doing it this way because it's not the cleanest. You do have to do a lot more work than it seems like, even though it seems like a quick and easy way. Just because you're scared of wiring, it's not the way. You just gotta learn and you just gotta do it this way. It's much cleaner and it's just the move. Okay, so the overall layout of this harness is this sits kind of in the middle of the firewall up against the, behind the dash there, and this runs down behind your heater blower or so, and it loops around, and this mounts onto the passenger footwell there on the floor, like that. And then you have these two big clumps here. There's two holes in the firewall, and these go through those, and there should be rubber grommets right here where I marked, and that will be where it goes into the engine bay and connects to your engine bay harness and also to your engine harness. So most of these square, big, beefy plugs you see over here, like this guy, and that guy, those are your main engine plugs for your engine harness. And then the other ones, like all this stuff here, this all plugs into other things in your engine bay. Like these are two grounds, and this goes to your starter. That is ABS. So those ones go into the engine bay, and then these ones run down to the passenger footwell and plug into, like right here, that plugs into your door. That is a regular Subaru door plug right there. Blue, this one usually is the one that goes to the rear of the car, like your gas tank operations. And you'll get some of these that plug into other parts, like these other three that are remaining. They go to other parts of the car, like up to the roof and whatever else. Some have more than others in certain spots, but it's all about the same layout. So to start though, this bulkhead harness is basically it's basically still the majority of the 99 Legacy GT harness. What I did though is I did similar to the car example where I parked them next to each other, but in this case I put the 99 Legacy GT harness and I parked it right next to an O2 Outback LL Bean bulkhead harness on my bench here. Maybe not just like that, I did one at a time. This is for an example. I parked them next to each other and I opened them up, stripped them all the way open. I threw some zip ties here and there just to keep holding it together, because one thing you can get really out of hand with is you can lose your lengths where it bends at certain spots, and not just that, but you can really just start opening up and getting away. This thing just turns into one big rat's nest if you don't keep it under control. And so what I did on this one is when I parked my two cars next to each other, my 99 Legacy GT harness and my O2 Outback harness, I opened them up and I took this ECU and these wires running out of it, and any wires that went right to the engine plugs, to all these guys right here, like these big ones, I kept those in. Any that went off into crazy other paths, I just trimmed and I cut. So I gave myself some leeway since most of the O2 harness was going to be trash when I'm done with it. So I wasn't afraid to cut back a little bit. But that also made me a little more worrisome when I got to ripping them into the Legacy harness, because I was a little unsure and it was pretty daunting. But after diving into it and just pushing through, I ended up getting the O2 Outback ECU with its original plugs and wires sitting into the Legacy bulkhead harness here. And then what you do after that is you'll have to merge. So okay, what my goal was to not touch the engine function related plugs that go to the engine bay, like your knock cam, crank sensor, and other things like that. And all the other ones that would have to be merged in for the rest of the car, like your AC control, or all those ones I trimmed, and then I merged right down here at the ECU kind of. And then that way my ECU is fully merged and it's all running off of this 6-cylinder Outback ECU, instead of having another 4-cylinder Legacy ECU sitting in parallel with it. It can do it, no problem. And then any of my check engine lights or like TCU codes and stuff like that can be reflashed away, and I can get this thing working with good cruise control and everything working on it, which is why I call it kind of like the poor man standalone. But if you wanted to change this and you wanted to do a actual standalone ECU, which would cost you a lot more money, but your tunability and performance upgrades and everything you can add to it easily, and just functions and things you can get out of it is just better. It is a move if you have the money for it, because basically the sky's the limit then at that point. But what you would change here is you don't have these couple plugs here, so you will not have factory plugs here. You couldn't. Some people make an adapter harness though, to where you could get like a basically like it's like a dongle. It goes into these plugs, the OEM plugs, and it goes to all different sorts of ways, but to the standalone ECUs plugs, and that's one way you could do it, which make it really easy. But most of the time, especially for these 6-cylinder swaps, since there's not a lot of aftermarket support for it, what you'll find yourself having to do is get a pigtail, basically a massive one, off the ECU. So you'll get your standalone ECU, and then you have the plug for it, and then just a ton of wires basically to try to sort through. But they will give you an ECU pinout, which I had to look up for this and find as well. That way I can merge to their corresponding homes here. But it's the same concept. You'll take that standalone ECU, and instead of having the benefit of having about, I don't know, 20, 30 wires or whatever it was already done for you, because they will go directly to the engine, you will just have to do that yourself. But it's the same thing as the other half of these that I just did here. So that is that. And then what I did up here, since I kept the engine harness ones that plug into the engine harness itself, those ones totally untouched. Didn't have to do anything with them. It was pretty great. And then like for the other ones though, you'll have these other engine bay wires here, and they go to all sorts of different things. And yeah, you could kind of keep more of the engine bay stuff from the O2 Outback harness and swap it into this harness, but you won't have that all the time, because sometimes you have massive generation differences with plugs and different like components that they use physically in the engine bay. So what I did was just worry about the engine harness plugs, and then everything else I trimmed down here, and then I merged. Okay, so right here I have 2 manual transmission plugs, and these are the ones from the Legacy GT harness. And that's why I was keeping them, because I'm not putting an automatic in this. I want the 5-speed to stay with the 6-cylinder. So what I did is these got merged. I'd have to remember where they ended up lying about, but they merged somewhere between here and the ECU. If you stayed with an automatic, you might get lucky with the plug being just about the same and might only having to swap a couple wires on that plug, which would be kind of cool. Or even sometimes, well, a good move could be, if it is a different transmission, even though most of them are about the same, you could just take that Outback automatic and make sure that it matches the same rear diff final drive. Or if you get the matching rear diff, then you could do something like that too, I'm sure. All right, so we talked about the ECU, we talked about your transmission wiring, and we talked about your engine plugs and that such, everything to do with that. Basically, this would be very similar wiring operation if you did a standalone, so just kind of up to you and a money question on what you'd like to do. And you merge them down here, and then these guys here, because I have a manual, I just deleted the automatic ones and merged those wires down here, and everything that the automatic wires that are coming from the ECU are clipped and no longer needed. So like these guys, there's a couple other signals, or a couple wires here that I need to actually de-pin and remove from these plugs because they're no longer needed. But the ECU is going to be yelling at me because it wants those signals. So what you do is when you reflash it, you tell it everything's fine. You have a couple other things. So you're going to see some pretty large yellow power wires and some weird operation ground wires that they got going on through these harnesses. You'll notice that some are tied together, and that's very particular. So for the ground wise and for the power wise, whoever designed this harness and did basically like the math behind it, they figured out certain things require a certain amount of like a load to it, or amount of ground support to it or such. So what you'll have to do as well is look for common ground groups, and you'll have to merge those accordingly so that everything is happy with its ground source or supply, whatever you want to call it. And then that goes the same for your power, and that's a lot of these big yellow red wires in here, like this guy here and back over here. I forget where exactly I merged them. I could find out if I really dug here, but I merged those as well. So your power and ground, that's mainly to do with engine sensors. Most of the other stuff kind of gets untouched and stays how it is. So another thing you have to worry about is your clutch inhibitor switch. That is a very common one that people overlook. Your car will not start, it'll disable spark. Depends how you do it. If you have a manual, you can just wire it into your regular clutch pedal switch there and to the ECU. Okay, so the last thing I'd like to talk about here is your connectors of choice here, and how you will splice, merge, or do whatever, connect your wires where they need to go to their homes. I'll float some pictures up here on the screen that I took when I was doing this a while back. But basically, I used to do what everyone does and just go to the store and you buy some butt connectors and you crimp them together, and that's fine for some things. Another thing you could do is what I found on an episode of, I think it was Skid Factory, where they were talking about these guys that make harnesses back in the day, or used to, all day long, and what they would use is open barrel connector crimps, like those kind. I'll float some pictures up here as well somewhere, but basically I like them because they bite onto the wire itself, and it also bites onto the insulation. So when it gets tugged either way in the harness, it cannot, the insulation can't slide down the wire at all and then give it a weaker point there. So that is what I did here, and you have to buy special crimping tools with that, but it's worth it, and it looks clean because it's also a very similar diameter to the original wire. So when I wrap this up right here, you'll hardly be able to tell, if at all, that I did any type of connectors. Another thing you'll run into is sometimes with your merge, you don't necessarily always need all the wires. So what I mean is, when I was doing some of these grounds and power supply routing here, mainly the grounds, I had extra wires that I didn't need. They were extra. I already merged in what the original harness needed and what the Outback harness needed, and so I just had little tails coming off in a couple spots here. And what they use from the factory, that's also why I like using these open barrel crimps, because that's what they use in the factory for their ground and power supply multiple wire merges, whatever you want to call it, I guess. But so here is some that used to be them right in here. And what the deal with these were is it's an open barrel. It doesn't hold the insulation. It just holds the wires together, but it's a big fat U. And you can shove multiple wires in there on either end and crimp it down with some really beefy crimpers, and that'll hold it all day long. The insulation will still move, so what they ended up doing is buying that really thick and really gooey electrical tape. And that goes really wide and really helps hold in that insulation in place with that connector. So it's the same concept, it's just a little dirtier than what this could be with some shrink tubing and some patience. But what I did is you can just trim them right down to it, or you can do a reconnect, like a new barrel connector. But if you trim it right down to it, fold the little butts in, it's not sharp at all. There's nothing in there that'll end up cutting through whatsoever. It's multiple layers, and now there's less wires. It's even wrapped around a couple more times. I would trust that for the rest of this vehicle's life. If you got wiring diagrams, especially ECU pinouts, and it helps sometimes if you have these engine plug pinouts, which you cannot find, by the way. Don't try looking unless someone will give them to you. Maybe I can, I guess, but because I did make them for my application here because of how I screwed up in the beginning and cutting some of these that I didn't need to cut. And after you do that, it's good luck finding a wiring diagram and tell you what that is there from the plug into the harness. So you have to make them by tracing wires. Okay, so that's basically what you do with the harness merge. I'm sure I probably missed some stuff. I was not that organized for that. But I wanted to do it really quick before I wrap this up because I'm trying to throw this harness back in the car because I already verified that it all works. So now I need to throw it in the car and actually put the interior back together all the way. And then I'm done with the inside of the car. And that is one thing that I'm not dealing with no more. And it's just the engine bay with my hoses, lines, or whatever I'm doing mechanical-wise, which is way easier and way more fun to do. But when you get done with this, it's very satisfying if you do a good job and you try to do it clean and OEM plus type or OEM. So another thing that I didn't talk about, another thing I want to add to this is I have multiple wiring harnesses from like past vehicles and stuff, and Subaru likes to wrap towards the ECU a little silver Subaru with a bunch of S's on it, like sticker that goes around it. And I have like some of those on some, what do you call it, same transfer tape or paper, whatever that you use for regular vinyl stickers that I save. It's stuff like that, and trying to get like the good electrical tape, try to save. I have a bag full of scraps from taking apart multiple harnesses. I'm not going to use all of it. A lot of it is just scrap because it turns to brittle plastic, but there are some good chunks in there, especially some rubber grommets and such that I will reuse. And if you want to reuse those rubber grommets that go out the firewall and take that off the harness, your best bet is honestly just taking it towards the bottom so you don't see it either. And once you have it out of the car, you flip it over and you can go at the bottom with a razor blade, one straight line cut through it, and that way you can glue it back together and run your finger across it when it's done. Hold after it like cures a little bit. That way you can hardly even tell. Plus, if it's on the bottom of the harness from looking down in the engine bay, you wouldn't be able to tell unless you literally get your head in the engine bay, which anyone doing that, you can yell at them. And there's like a couple other things, just making sure your lengths are good. Like when I threw this back in the car, I wanted to make sure that all these wires weren't like too long in any spots or too short and weren't reaching where they were supposed to. Because if I fully wrapped this harness up and then did that for just one and done, go in and put everything in the car, I would have been kind of screwed in a couple of spots, because even though I tried to keep good track of this along the way, there was a couple spots throughout this harness that that were just a touch too long, and that could be from just how they were ran in the Outback compared to the Legacy for some things, or when I took it apart and put it back together, maybe it was like twisted around a certain way in a couple different spots that just ate up a couple more inches or so. But what I did is when I did put it in and make sure everything works and I checked all my lengths, if anything was too long, I just bundled it up. Like right here is a bundle. I don't know if you can even see that on there. But what I'm going to do now before I wrap it up is I'm going to twist this in a certain way that the wires fall nicely on the harness and nothing has any harsh bends anywhere. And then that way and nothing gets like crimped over time or starts breaking the wires themselves inside or whatever. Everything should fall nicely, nothing should be tight, and nothing should be exposed as well. So you're going to have some sections though that didn't have a bunch of wrapping over it to begin with, so that's fine. So my plan is I'm going to wrap this up after I get all my lengths corrected, how I marked them when they were in the car, briefly installed. And then I will wrap it up everywhere it needs to be with old conduit that's still good, some new in some spots, and a bunch of new electrical tape. You should not have any zip ties on your harness. These are just placeholders for right now. The zip ties they're bad, they're a little aggressive, and they kind of bite in, and it's not great. So these will all get trimmed, don't worry about that. They'll be deleted out of here. But once I get that done, then I'll put this back into my wagon here and make another video on it running and my next steps along the way, the more fun stuff. I didn't want to really make too many videos on this until it was done and like actually in the car and working. So after this is in the car, we will be working in the engine bay for the most part. I will do this for you. If you want me to do this for you though, I will need a couple things. Is the bulkhead harness out of your car that the motor will be going into, and then a 6-cylinder ECU with the bulkhead harness as well. And if you're doing a standalone though, what I would need is a standalone ECU and its wiring that comes with it. And then all I would need, instead of a whole 6-cylinder harness, is just engine plugs. I do want to do like a little, I don't know what you call it, but like a notice, or like just so you know, this is my first time doing an actual harness merge. I've done a lot of wiring, but never an actual like merge like this. I think it turned out really, really good. I did a lot of good research on it prior to doing it and as I was doing it. And I've been crossing my T's and dotting my I's. And it worked first try. I threw it in the car. And I mean, I left a couple things unplugged from just missing underneath the dash that I should have had plugged in. And it was just stupid things like that. But my wiring wise, 100% worked right out of the gate. And I was blown away by that. Not that I don't trust my own work, but come on, that's a lot of freaking wires. Like, damn. Okay, so I wasn't going to show this just because I thought I could get it busted out in one night and get it back in the car and then just show it next time running in the car with the interior back together. But I ran out of time after setting up the camera, trying to make videos, and me rambling like I am right now. But basically, I took pictures beforehand so I know what the wrap looked like on this harness prior to me touching it and molesting it. So what I do have though is that's kind of loosely wrapped up, and so is most of this stuff over here. I'm working my way from the legs into the main over here, and then any of my bundles that I had to shorten up for lengths, I will rewrap around. Like I'll take this plastic off and all this bundle of wire here, I'll have to wrap it around so it's nice and it all sits nice in there. What I do have though over here on my couch is this is a bag of old crap from the two harnesses I ripped apart. This now is mainly just actual crap, and this is just trash. But what I pulled out of it is I have my dudes here for splitting, and as you see, I did what I told you guys not to do, and I cut it on top, but you live and you learn. This would have been better if I cut from the bottom like I was talking about, so then when you glue it back together, you don't even notice it. Maybe I have more from other harnesses on my shelf over here that I might just end up pulling from if they're like the same kind of boots. But I got a lot of conduit, or a little sheathing here that's all pretty decent still. It's not like brittle plastic. These guys are pretty nice too, just massive piece of like, I don't know, it's kind of like electrical tape, but, or maybe it's, I don't know, whatever. But that stuff will go on in certain spots, like this piece, and maybe another piece kind of go around this bend around the ECU, just because it's by the floor, by some metal, so you don't want it to rub over time, so you want to really make sure that's protected, and there's a couple other spots like that. But yeah, and then this is actually just crap too that I pulled out of it. Another thing I want to show you guys since I have it out here is, I don't think this was it, but there's one kind of like this. Oh, like this guy here. So what you have here is they call this your joint ground connector. And you want to make sure, when I was talking about, oh, it's not even connected, right. So what I was talking about prior was that you have some grounds that need to be grouped with each other just because of how the whole operation here is like set up and how certain things are supposed to be with certain other ones. I kind of forget how to explain that right now, but anyways, if it'll focus, this guy, if you were to take this apart, it would actually tell you on the plug itself. I might have a picture I took previously that I could put up here, but it'll tell you that like, oh, these wires are actually all connected. Even though it's all the same plug, only like these wires are connected to each other and only these wires are connected to each other or something like that. But I didn't want to have this in here because most of the time, this is somewhere along this region or so, and it's just like taped to the side, and it looked kind of gross and ugly. And since I'm redoing all of it, I don't really need to do that. Instead, what I can do is just merge them throughout the harness, which I did. So this guy gets deleted. And then I think this guy was like another one just like that, another like ground of some sorts. But there's a lot of different things that they use throughout the harness like that, where they put them all together and hold like wires together. So let me get that wrapped up, and the next time I see you guys, I will be hopefully fully put back together an interior and showing it off for you guys.